And welcome to Around the Ozark Spotlight. Each week, we uncover the stories behind the people who live and work here in Southwest Missouri. Those individuals with entrepreneurial spirit who work to develop the lives of others or put pen to paper to write books about the stories and history of the Ozarks and its people. I'm Scott Meier, and today we're going to explore the world of local music. And with me is Randy Hamm, the former professor of music and director of jazz studies at Missouri State University here in Springfield. But he's currently the director and CEO of the Missouri Jazz Orchestra, otherwise more commonly known as Mojo. Welcome, Randy.
Welcome.
Uh,
It's
it's so
it's good to be here.
well. It's exciting to have you here because we had the pleasure of joining some friends of ours. He's also a musician, and said, "Let's do this jazz thing. We got to go to the comedy club and hear Mojo." I think you played, if I'm not mistaken, at the Arts Festival a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Um, and personally, I'm an old guy. I love swing and I love jazz, and God, we were blown away. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're most welcome, and thanks for coming out.
Oh, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Randy Hamm first, if we can. Who is he? Where are you from?
I grew up in Indiana, and small farming community in the southern southwest part of the state. And after high school, I did a little bit of college, and then off to the military for a little bit, and then I landed in Denton, Texas, where I did my finished my undergraduate degree and graduate work, and got a job teaching at that then Southwest Missouri State University as the saxophone teacher.
Is that right? Well, you
And
obviously love saxophone. I'll tell you that. That's
oh, I
you can
do,
see
I
that
do.
when you play.
Yeah, it's I tried not playing for a while, but it I didn't pick it, it picked me.
Is that right? It's
Yeah,
one of
that's
the
how.
one of the beauties of your group is anybody that is involved in music. You got to love horns, and to see all of you having a great time. Now you got a great drummer. He's like a young Buddy Rich,
Yeah.
and guitarist. But the horns really make it.
That's I've been in love with that stuff since Buddy Rich's band in the 1960s, and then of course, our generation had Chicago, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, all those great horn bands in the early 70s, and
Sure.
it's just a fantastic time in music, and there's that kind of crossover from traditional jazz into more jazz, funk, and rock, which is it's all just beautiful. But the horn section is that's the sweet spot.
So you're an Indiana kid, and you came here via the military, but you've been now in Southwest Missouri for years.
Yeah, we moved here in the summer of '89. That's when I started teaching.
Hmm.
And I just retired after 33 years teaching here. I did 3 years at a university in Texas, so 36 years total, and that's enough. So now I'm kind of following more of my passion of just trying to just be a musician.
Congratulations on that. You know
Well, thank you.
what's interesting with the Mojo group is you've got all different age players in that group.
Yeah, it really is a wonderful cross section. And many of the guys in the band are former students or went through our degree programs at Missouri State. And you
Mhm.
mentioned Dan Pasquale, the drummer. He's a graduate of our jazz studies program, and so that's been going for about the same length of time that we formed Missouri Jazz Orchestra, about 2009, when we started the big band, and that's when I wrote the curriculum for the jazz degree plan at
Mhm.
Missouri State. And he's one of our grads, and there's several MSU alumni there. But yeah, it's a cross section. I think I and the guitar player might be the oldest cats in the band, and then it goes down, to like Dan, who's I don't maybe in his late 20s. I don't even know exactly how old he is, but
Right.
it's a great gathering of musicians. We all have the same goals in mind, despite the generational differences. So really, it's a fun group on and off the bandstand.
Randy Hamm is my guest today and Around the Ozark Spotlight. Randy being I'd like to call you the conductor, but you're the director and CEO of the Missouri Jazz Orchestra, which, by the way, just so the folks can attach it to what they're missing and don't have to miss and can go and see. The orchestra itself plays every, is it the first Tuesday and third Tuesday or
The
Wednesday? I can't recall.
first and third Tuesdays of every month, and if there's 5 Tuesdays, then we're dark for 3 weeks. But the first and third Tuesdays at the Blue Room Comedy Club, and we hit at 7, play a couple of sets, come out and have a beverage, a little bit of food, and it's a Tuesday night, but it's an early evening, and it's a lot of fun.
Now I
It's
got to ask you, there's only I only counted one young lady in the group. Is that are we open to some more, or is that the
oh
only
sure,
one
oh
if you can
sure, yeah.
find that wants to play jazz?
Yeah, that's Tina Clausen, and Tina, for a number of years, was on the music faculty at Drury University,
Uh-huh.
and she's since left that job and has gone back to art school. But she's still playing. She's a great player. She's a great alto saxophonist, and it's great to have her in the band. And but there's no gender rules or anything in jazz. Everybody, if you can play, come and get it.
Now I want people to understand if you haven't seen this group, it's not Dixieland jazz. We're talking about. I thought it was more of a mix of almost swing and jazz. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. The traditional jazz, you think about Louis Armstrong and the Hot Five and Hot Sevens,
Hmm.
and his career. If anybody's kind of studied jazz history or followed his career, if you're old enough to do that, but what we're about more is like the Count Basie Orchestra of the '50s, some Buddy Rich stuff that I mentioned Buddy earlier. Uh,
Sure.
was a huge influence on me whenever I was a young lad, and Thad Jones, Sammy Nestico, and that's all that '50s, 1960s tradition of swing bands. But we also do modern things. Thad Jones is, even though most of his music was written in the '60s or '70s, was very forward thinking and still sounds
Hmm.
very contemporary, even in this part of the history of jazz.
Now, Randy, this is your time, but I got to share one other thing with you. Back when my wife and I were dating, and this is in La Crosse, Wisconsin, of all places, I'm at the University of Wisconsin there. She's at Viterbo, which is a small Catholic school. At Viterbo, they brought in an act that I always wanted to see, even in my early 20s. Count Basie came and played,
Oh,
and it was
oh
just
man.
prior to his passing. And I want to say there were, I think, 8 or 10 in his group. All of these guys obviously had played together forever, and that was a special night.
I'm sure it was. Man, that's incredible. I've never got to see Basie live whenever Basie was still with us.
Well, the relationship that I could see in your group now with one of the trombonists look like you guys go way back. Uh,
Carl Hose. Yeah, well, I've known
I mean, I
Carl.
could see the two of you playing with one another when
Yeah,
he was doing his solo and you're doing yours, and
yeah.
you're having fun. But that's the way Count Basie was with a couple of guys in his group, where you could just tell these guys beyond the music. I mean, the friendship must go really deep, almost like a brotherhood.
God, I've known Carl probably 30 years. I met Carl fairly early in my time in Missouri, and the guitar player and I have been friends almost as long. I met him. Actually, I met Mark Ellman, our guitarist, when I went to see his band, which was a touring band called Arias, and I saw him in South Bend, Indiana in 1978 or '79, and we
Wow.
met. And then our paths crossed again in like 1990 here in Springfield,
Sure.
and we did a gig together, and we were kind of hanging out, and it's just like there's something. Where did have we met before? And so as we just started talking and exchanging friends in common in the music world, and then a name was mentioned, and I was like, that's it. That there was a guy named Don Smith that used to play with Mark and Arias, and I had worked with him, and so that's how we connected at that point. So really, I've known Mark for 40 years probably, more working together and being friends on a daily basis since he came to Missouri in 1990, 1991, something like that. So these guys are longtime friends, and the sharing of music together makes it deeper, I think.
Oh, I can't imagine. And so, music was in your family, or were you the first musician?
Well, my father loved jazz, and he was a guitar player. And whenever I was a kid, he was at that point was a mechanic in the Chrysler garage, and
Okay.
he'd come home every day and go in and clean up his hands with all the pumice soap and all that stuff, and then
Sure.
he would sit on the edge of the bed in the bedroom and practice guitar for an hour or two. And even as a young child, I would sit at his feet just mesmerized
That's
with
crazy.
with
That's
the
wild.
music part of it. And then he'd go off and play, the Elks Club or whatever dances there were on
Sure.
Friday and Saturday nights, and they were playing, the swing tunes, the Duke Ellington,
Hmm.
Satin Doll, Don't Get Around Much Anymore, that kind of stuff. And when I was 15 or 16, he let me start going with the band and let me set in with him at the clubs where
Really?
they played. Yeah.
So now, how many instruments do you play?
Well, I play all the saxophones, flute and clarinet, and a little bit of piano. And for my first instrument, because of my father, was guitar. But
Right.
I'll never play guitar in public.
Now,
But
were you able to read music back then when you were a kid, or did you do it? Did you pick it up as
well,
watching and in your head? I mean,
I had joined the band program, so I learned how to read music. But whenever I would go and learn these tunes with the guys, there wasn't any sheet music, so I learned everything by ear.
okay,
Which was a great experience because if you can't hear well when you're playing music, you can't really connect with your instrument.
sure,
So
absolutely,
having that
and
ear training and the ability to hear a melody and make it come out of your instrument, that was a great education for me at that point.
now the other couple we were with the other night at the Blue Room Comedy Club to watch the group play. He plays horn. He plays a trumpet, and he said, it's funny. In his mind, a trumpet is an instrument that some days you feel like you can be the best trumpet player ever, and he said some days you pick it up and it's like the first time you ever touch the instrument. Does
Yeah.
does that happen with a saxophone as well?
Yeah, I think that all musicians experience that to some degree, but I have to admit the trumpet guys, because of the embouchure and how the muscle structure and how the face feels, has a great deal to do with how they sound. Uh,
Mhm.
but some days are better than others. Sometimes it's influenced by who you're playing with. If you hear somebody that plays something killing, it's just like you feel inspired, and then that helps you raise your game. But
Sure.
yeah, I can understand that completely, and he's spot on. I've heard that from other trumpet players.
Now,
Uh,
I had a Facebook post the other day that asked about favorite saxophone. My brother played the saxophone in high school, so I'm kind of I love the sax. I never learned how. I was busy playing football, but uh, with his saxophone playing, I was always intrigued by that instrument. But the Facebook post said favorite rock music that features a saxophone. For me personally, it's Savoy Truffle by the Beatles. I don't know why. I just think the Beatles had some kind of a connection with saxophone playing. It's in a number of their songs, especially on the White Album.
yeah.
If someone asked you about your favorite sax riff, even in rock music, what do you think that would be?
Sure. Geez. You know, I think, and actually, I met this guy back in the '70s. Was Eddie Money?
Okay.
You remember Eddie Money?
Oh yeah, I paid a lot of money to have Eddie Money do a concert for me at a radio station I was running, and he was supposedly on the wagon at the time, and he actually fell off the stage. So his wagon was moving. His wagon was moving. But tell your story about Eddie
Well,
Money.
no, it's just actually a friend of mine had a record store, and they were doing a promotion at his distributor in Indianapolis, and we went up, and Eddie Money was there, and he was having fun.
Uh,
And but he was a saxophone player that had like that big rock, a couple of hits and stuff. But
right.
mostly for me in the '70s, it was more like Grover Washington.
Hmm.
Kind of not really smooth jazz, but kind of that kind of the Crusaders with Wilton Felder,
Sure.
those guys. Those were the big influences for me. But I played in a number of rock bands around Indianapolis, and played saxophone and guitar during that time, and
Hmm.
and I would honk out a few rock and roll saxophone solos. But it's like, well, there's like Clarence Clemens with
Yeah.
the
E
bar.
Street Band. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's those guys, and that really is kind of a niche thing, to get that rock and roll style that doesn't cross over into the jazz land. You know what I mean? Because it's like that
Yeah.
jazz vocabulary doesn't necessarily translate into that kind of a groove. So it's a little bit of a different vocabulary. Uh, but then, with the other guys that I mentioned, they come from a jazz background, so their jazz and rock and funk has a different feel to it. But that's where I spent most of my listening years in the late '60s and early '70s.
My guest today and Around the Ozark Spotlight is Randy Hamm. Randy, a former professor of music at MSU right here in Springfield, and also currently the director and CEO of Missouri Jazz Orchestra, or otherwise known as Mojo. We're going to be back in a moment with more on Around the Ozark Spotlight. I'm your host, Scott Meier, back in just a minute.
Hey, everybody, it's Ethan and Sarah Forhetz from your favorite podcast, Around the Ozarks in 5. I'm sure you've been wondering, how can I get even more amazing stories, events, and witty banter to start my day?
Well, look no further. Here we are. Sign up for our daily newsletter. You'll have what's going on around the Ozarks right at your fingertips each weekday morning.
Yeah, just go to AroundTheOzarks.com, click on the newsletter tab to sign up.
Thanks for listening to Around the Ozarks in 5. We hope to see you in your inbox soon.
Welcome back to the second half of today's Around the Ozarks Spotlight. I'm Scott Meier, your host, and with me is Randy Hamm. Randy is the current director. We talk a lot about what you've done, but let's talk about what you're doing, because I think that's pretty exciting right now. Current director of a group called Mojo, which is the Missouri Jazz Orchestra that plays every first Tuesday and third Tuesday night at Blue Room Comedy right here in Springfield. And I did get tickets. I went online. The good news is they don't cost anything. The bad news is I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to get tickets, because I figured it would be a full house. Wasn't quite a full house, but I'm sure you've had a few.
We've had a few, and the time whenever Crave was open, it used to be the old oyster bar.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, and it burned, but we hit a really good stride, and this was before the pandemic, and that was a really good room, the big room in the back there to play there, and we were drawing really good crowds, anywhere from 150 to 200 on a Tuesday night, and of course their food and beverages and everything there for that everybody loves, but the Blue Room is a really nice venue, and I think it seats around 210 or 220, and acoustically it's a really good room.
It sounded great. And I'll tell you, anybody that likes live music, I've been part of the Springfield Symphony Board for about 7 years now. And the arts are important. Any community has to have arts. Arts allow us to get good people to move to communities our size, because big cities have them, but a lot of times smaller cities don't.
Right.
And we've got so much music in this town. I mean, it's incredible how much music. But being able to watch you all perform and literally feel like you're part of it, because Randy, you're really good at getting the audience involved in the passion that you have and that you share with the other members of the group with the music that you play.
Well, it's because I've been an educator for so many years. It's kind of just in my blood. So that as I'm introducing a piece of music, we'll talk about the composer or the arranger and where they were in the timeline of jazz history, just to kind of present a program that's not just a concert but edutainment.
Sure, absolutely.
To kind of educate, because Springfield is a very rich community, as you mentioned, with all the arts programs that we do have, and with the founding of Mojo as a 501c3, and now we're a resident company of the Galois Theater with offices up on the third floor, and that gives us a more elevated platform to pursue and educate. And so our mission is really performance, education, and advocacy, to bring jazz and that nonprofit organization is kind of another pillar that our community can really benefit from, in terms of bringing in jazz artists. Like we just had Branford Marsalis.
Which, I wish I'd have known. I mean, I gotta go to see that.
It was an incredible concert, and it was the first weekend in April, and we're going to have bookends of a jazz festival. The April date will be the Galois Jazz Festival, and then in October, on the first weekend of October, we'll do the Springfield Jazz Festival, and we'll have guest artists for the Saturday night headline concert, and Big Bag Voodoo Daddies is the headliner for October on Saturday night, but Mojo is going to be playing a show at the Galois on Friday night. But I think it's important for our community to really, because there are jazz lovers that live in 417. I mean, there really are. I've met so many people that are knowledgeable about the music and the genre, and have listened all their lives, and usually go to St. Louis or Kansas City for concerts. But now I think as we get our concert season developed, they can stay home and come and see world-class jazz musicians playing alongside with our local heroes of Mojo.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to do the show with you today was to give you more attention as we can in the marketplace. I'm not sure that enough people are aware of the opportunity to go see and hear the Missouri Jazz Orchestra because, as I say, it's amazing. And a lot of us, the only time you can get that kind of music, unless going either to the symphony or maybe going to one of the other musical programs that somebody's touring,
Yeah.
to understand that the city of Springfield, especially with the 3 universities that are here, and all the music that's in this area, we went down to Branson the other night and saw Queen Esther.
Wow.
And the music surrounding that, the music in that town, the music with people that live here and go to that town and play. And I'm sure there's a lot of people from Branson that come up here and play as well.
Sure.
There's just so much music in this area.
There is, and it's kind of hard to get the word out. So really, we're kind of growing by word of mouth because for a small organization like us to have the funding to do any kind of marketing or advertising, it can social media is our sweet spot where we've got I think close to 2,500 maybe 3,000 followers on our Facebook page, but first and third Tuesdays is when we play. So come on in. We got plenty of room for everybody.
Now, what was amazing is you said you don't practice, you actually practice on the first and third Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Where you bring out new music or you call out a page number and everybody goes and starts playing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and the strange thing about that is there's bands like this in major cities all over the United States, and they're called rehearsal bands.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they just get together and rehearse, and other times, like us, they just have a regular gig in a club, and it's free and open to the public, and we just show up. We don't rehearse, we just play.
Well, you wouldn't know it until you said that. I mean, we're sitting at our table going, they sound like they've been playing together forever.
Well, we've been playing together since 2009, and other than during the COVID pandemic, we've hit every Tuesday and first and third for 14 years.
That's incredible. Now, if I say somebody like Dave Brubeck, what does Dave Brubeck mean to you? Is that something that's another style of jazz?
It's Dave Brubeck is one of the godfathers. I mean, a great composer, and his music. In the 1950s and 60s with that quartet, and his landmark recording in 1959 called Time Out, where they explored odd meter music from 3/4 to 5/4 to 7/4 was just groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And really an important person in history. And it was great that the Hammond's Hall for the Performing Arts brought the Dave Brubeck Quartet in a handful of years ago before he passed away. And I went to the concert and it was fantastic.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How many years ago was that?
Yeah, that's probably been at least 10 years, I think.
Okay.
Could have been 20 and it could have been 3. I'm not quite sure.
Well, in our world, it's funny. Somebody will go, you remember that thing that happened in the 80s? You go, yeah, it was like 20 years ago. And you go, no, that's 40 years ago.
Yeah,
it doesn't take long.
Yeah, I think it was in this century, I think.
Yeah, right. Now, of the famous horn players and clarinet players and saxophone players out there, did you get a chance to ever see anybody like Louis Armstrong live?
No, I have not. Didn't get an opportunity to see that. I've only talked with people that actually met him or got to see him play.
Sure.
And growing up in Southern Indiana, there just wasn't a lot of opportunity to see a lot of concerts like that.
Right.
But since I moved to Texas, I've had opportunities to play and see. One of my heroes, Phil Woods, who was a great alto saxophonist, and he's probably maybe more known to the average listener of music as the saxophonist on the Billy Joel song, "Booty Boo Boo Booty Doo." I love you. What is the name of that song? You know the one I'm talking about?
I just saw Billy Joel. I'm trying to think of
Just the Way You Are, maybe. Anyway,
okay. Yeah. Just the Way You Are.
Woods is the guy that played the alto saxophone solo on that big hit.
Okay.
So, but he was one of my idols, and I got to see him many, many times at this club in Fort Worth, Texas. It was fantastic. But nobody of the stature of Duke Ellington or Count Basie or Louis Armstrong or anybody like that. But we have recordings. We have their recordings, and that's a blessing.
Now, the drummer you have, you said he was one of your students.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I'll tell you what. if I was a drummer, I can't imagine any other music I'd rather play than what he was able to play and what he sounds like, because that really goes back to and that's why I say it's such a cross in my mind anyway between jazz and swing, because it's almost like the intro to Sing Sing Sing, with the drums
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
it lets a drummer feature himself as opposed to being in a rock group where they might go off and just kind of do whatever they do.
Yeah.
There's music in the drums
Absolutely.
in jazz.
Absolutely. Dan Pasquale is a great musician, and his instrument is the drums. But he plays with so much energy, and I have played in big bands for the last 35, 40 years, and it's always important to have a really good lead trumpet player, which we have in Bryant Robertson, and
Mhm.
a really good drummer, and which we have in Dan Pasquale. Those two things are probably the most critical things for the success of a big band: lead trumpet and drummer.
Really, not the sax. I thought
No,
I thought
well,
the sax
well,
was
when it comes time for the solos, the sax guys are
right.
they're more important.
So as the leader and as you're playing through the night, it's the thing I think when in jazz that's so interesting is there are times when you either have predetermined that somebody's going to do a solo, or I don't know if you have a hand thing that you do that says, okay, it's your turn to do a solo, but they freeform, right? Isn't that primarily a freeform?
Yeah.
And do they know it's coming up, or is that just something you do on the go?
Well, both. Sometimes, if we play an arrangement from start to finish, it's notated in the music where a certain person like Carl might solo, or one
Okay.
of the trumpet players, Jim Shannon, solos a lot, and Mark Brueggemann, or guitar or piano, and it's written into the chart. Then those are other arrangements that we have where an open solo section can be opened up, and we just open it up until I give a cue to go on to the next rehearsal number or letter in the arrangement. So everybody's on the same page of where we are on the paper, and then we just open it up, and when people stand up to blow, that is the crown jewel of jazz, and that's the content of improvisation. And so
So
they're creating and spontaneous composition of the melodic content that they bring to the solo based on the harmonic changes in the song. And so
Randy Hamm is
improvisation is really an important part.
Randy Hamm is my guest today on Around the Ozark Spotlight. Randy is the director of the Missouri Jazz Orchestra, which is a 501(c), and tips are appreciated, right, Randy? Those go a long way, I'm sure.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
And
what was the name of that player? You had a name for the
yes,
player,
Phil is the 18th member of our band, and his name is Phil the Tip Jar.
Phil the Tip Jar. And Phil, it looked like Phil did a pretty good job the other night, so that was good to
He
see.
does pretty good. He does pretty good.
Now, do you guys, well, you call it an orchestra. Is it an orchestra or a band? Let's get that right.
Well, that I think the some people refer to those ensembles as big bands, like the big band era.
Mhm.
And in at some point, like the Count Basie Orchestra started, the Duke Ellington Orchestra, and so in that context, there's a lot of colors and textures that can come out of the diverse instrumentation that's in an ensemble like that.
Mhm.
That I think it reaches more towards an orchestral environment rather than just a band.
Right.
Not that a band is a bad thing, but I think Mojo, of course, Missouri Jazz Orchestra, it fit in well with our little acronym there for Mojo, as
Sure.
Missouri Jazz Orchestra, rather than trying to move the route of a big band. But it's essentially the same ensemble. But sometimes the music that we play does utilize more colors and textures. The way the arranger has written the music, and sometimes there's doubles of flute and clarinet in the saxophone section, which changes the color and the texture tremendously.
In the last 30 seconds we've got, how difficult is your job? Is it just a lot of fun? You make it look like it's a lot of fun, but I got to believe there's some work involved.
Oh yeah, there's work, but it's a labor of love. That's something that I just love doing, and there's a lot of guys that volunteer to help out, setting
Mhm.
up and tearing down and doing library work and keeping the books in shape, and generally the lead players in each of the section, if somebody's going to be gone for one of our gigs, then they take care of that section and make sure there's 4 trombones or 4 trumpets. I take care of the usually rhythm section and saxophone section, but everybody kind of chips in. But it's a labor of love.
And again, tickets are free. And again, where can folks find you?
At the Blue Room Comedy Club, and that's on what street?
It's right
is
off
it?
of South Avenue. That's what I always
Yeah,
say.
it's not just off of the square downtown,
Right.
and that's first and third Tuesdays of every month at 7 p.m. till 9 p.m. And the tickets are free. I think the going online and getting a ticket is just so that the staffing can be appropriate
Sure.
for the attendance and the kitchen and everything that they take care of in the front of the house.
And beverages and light nosh are available. So if you want to eat a little bit and drink a little bit, you can and
Yeah.
enjoy the music. I want to thank my guest, Randy Hamm, today on Around the Ozark Spotlight. Thanks, Randy. Also,
you,
my
sir.
producers, Taylor Worley and Jay Stevens, and all of you for joining us. If you happen to miss all or part of today's conversation, you can always find it at ATO Spotlight at aroundtheozarks.com or on the ATO app found in either the Apple App Store or Android apps. There you're going to find today's program as well as all of this past year's shows. I'm Scott Meier. Remember, every day is a gift. It's the best present you can ever receive. Have a great day. Thanks again, Randy.